Hi, and welcome to Season 2 of That's Ruddy Mysterious, a podcast of short tales about true mysteries. What created the Potomsky Crater? Who was involved in the 1963 Great Train Robbery? I'm not going to solve those mysteries, but they'll be interesting to learn about. I'm your host, Kelly with an I. Transcripts and references for all episodes can be found at that'sruddymysterious.wordpress.com. No apostrophe and no exclamation point. Today's tale is about the Crooked Forest. Kilian Schoenberger, a landscape photographer, said of the Crooked Forest, "Some people speak about imprints of the war since there was so much fighting between the Red Army and the Wehrmacht in this area. More obscure theories talk about witchcraft and energy fields, but perhaps there will never be a final answer." The Crooked Forest of Poland, also known as Siwy Las, is a group of about 400 pine trees that are bent into the shape of a J. Their vertical growth has been stunted, although they are still healthy enough to reach up to 50 feet tall. The bend in each tree begins between 10 and 50 centimeters, or 4 and 20 inches off the ground. The curves are up to 3 meters, or 9.8 feet in length. All of the crooked trees are bent toward the north. The Crooked Forest can be found near the western border in the Gryfino Forest of Nowe Czarnowo, south of Szczecin. The Gryfino Forest is a healthy forest, and within it lies a grove of crooked trees. At the base of each tree, there's a sharp bend that leads to a pronounced curve. Then the trunks of the trees grow upward into a mostly straight upper tree. The forest was first discovered and reported in a 1971 article entitled Peculiar Deformation of Pines, Pius Sylvestris L., and the Odra River by Ogun Yosh Kwiklinski. The article reports that there are 400 bent trees in 22 rows covering 1,670 square meters. However, the Gryfino Forest District, the government agency overseeing the protection and management of the region's forests, disagrees. According to them, there are about 80 crooked pines in the forest. They are currently estimated to be about 85 years old. The forest was planted sometime between the 1930s and 1943. Oral tradition says it was planted around 1930. They say that most of the trees are not planted in rows, although there are still traces of row planting. Rather, the majority of the trees are scattered around normal trees, some being in small groups. The crooked pines don't actually make up a forest or a stand, but are all in small clusters. The trees are spread out over 2 hectares or 5 acres. Interestingly, the tree rings and the knots of the trees show that something happened to cause the bends when the trees were between the ages of 7 and 10 years old. If the trees were planted in 1943, that would mean the deformities took place between 1950 and 1953. If the trees were planted in the 1930s, the deformations would have taken place around 1940. No records exist of the planting of the trees. This could be because of World War II. Before 1945, Szczecin, the main city near the forest, was under German control, and only a few Poles lived there. In the early 1945, the Soviets seized Szczecin. The Allies moved the German-Polish border further west after the war. Szczecin and most of West Pomerania became Polish territory, and most of the Germans left. By about 1950, the Polish military had expelled the Germans entirely. It's not surprising that the records from that time period are gone. No one knows for sure why the Crooked Forest was planted, but there are some theories. Lydia Misinska, from the Gryfino Forest District, said, "This forest probably originated from the intentional activity of a man growing curves of trees for useful purposes." There are a lot of theories as to the purpose of the trees. Some believe that the trees were bent for the purposes of creating musical instruments like cellos, double basses, and elf horns. Some believe that the trees were intended to be used for furniture like rocking chairs. Some think the trees were meant for planks for boats or barrels. Others believe the trees were going to be used for sleds or sleighs with curved front ends. Yet others believe the trees were intended for carts that transported hay or grain. There are also a number of theories regarding just how the trees were bent. Some believe the trees were bent incidentally, possibly from heavy snowfalls crushing the trees, or maybe even high winds causing them to bend. Others believe there may have been some sort of genetic mutation that caused the bends. Some believe the Nazis bent the trees in an attempt to make swastikas out of them. Some believe aliens bent the trees. There are those who believe that gravitational forces are stronger in the crooked forest and that these forces pulled the trees downward into a curve. Admittedly, this theory doesn't make much sense at all. Gravity pulls things down, not into a curve, and the trees are not all in one place. Some believe that German tanks ran over the trees when they were young. This theory also seems far-fetched. Tanks would have flattened the whole forest, not just small areas. Misinska says that this was not the case, and also said the trees were not bent by secret nuclear weapons testing, aliens, or paranormal activity. Whatever the cause of the bends, most people agree that whoever planted the trees cut the shoots partially across, then bent the attached portion. The remaining shoot then grew into a curve and then upward. The reason, however, remains elusive. If the Germans planted and shaped the trees, it's possible they had to leave before they could use them. The town of Gryfino was mostly abandoned between World War II and the 1970s. Tree shaping is done for many reasons. In California, the tree circus is a great example of trees being bent to create art. The Living Root Bridges in Meghalaya region of northeast India is a series of trees bent for the purpose of creating a bridge. Native Americans have historically bent trees as trail markers. Today, the Crooked Forest is a national monument, designated as such in the 1980s. It is a tourist draw, but as the trees slowly die off, so does the monument. What is the purpose of the Crooked Forest? How are all those trees bent? What do you think? Thanks for listening to today's episode of That's Ruddy Mysterious. I'm your host, Kelly with an I. If you enjoyed this episode, leave a review and follow That's Ruddy Mysterious to be updated about new episodes. Tune in next Tuesday for another thought-provoking tale.